we're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's August 25th here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yeun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And Park Ki-hoon.
Happy Friday.
All right, happy Friday. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Recently, a 35-year-old Chinese national who's ethnically Korean named Kwon Pyong has been arrested for trying to enter South Korea illegally after traveling about 300 kilometers across the Yellow Sea on a jet ski with binoculars and a compass. He's a human rights activist who has been repressed for criticizing China's President Xi Jinping, and Kwon reportedly is seeking political asylum in South Korea, and he had no choice but to illegally cross into Korea as Beijing stops activists from leaving its territory. Moving on to our second story. Last month, the famous panda Pooh Bao, living in Korea's largest theme park, greeted his two newborn siblings. They're now over 48 days old and require names. That's why on Thursday, the park asked people to upload their suggestions online or offline as part of a naming contest. A total of 4 name pairs will be selected as candidates for online and offline votes. The final names will be announced in October. And switching gears to news in the United States, job growth performance there was a bit weaker than what was projected by around 300,000 jobs. The Bureau of Labor Statistics on Wednesday released an annual report that showed employment gains in March came down by 306,000. But experts aren't concerned because America's labor market seems to be looking strong. And if we expand a bit on that, that's partly thanks to the Fed's efforts to curb inflation. In the past year or so, the central bank has raised its benchmark interest rate 11 times to the highest we've ever seen. Speaking of key interest rates, though, South Korea, on the other hand, has decided not to budge for the 5th time straight, keeping its interest rate at 3.5%. And this comes amid weakening investment and less consumption. And due to the economic slowdown, the country's job market seems to be in the blue. Now, hearing this news, some millennials and Gen Z went on social media saying that the United States seems to be a new land of opportunity, and some even expressed their frustration at the domestic job market. What are your thoughts on this, Ki-hoon?
Right, you know, the United States has always been called the land of opportunity.
Yeah.
And for those Koreans who did immigrate to the States a long time ago, I mean, I'm pretty sure they were in a stable financial situation. The domestic market here in Korea looks very bleak at the moment, mainly due to the economic slowdown in China. You know, China didn't do so well for the rebound ever since the pandemic,
Right.
and their economic growth is slightly dropping, which directly affects the Korean economy because they are the main exporters of Korea. And when the export market drops, economic activity just loses momentum, and it obviously affects the whole job market in Korea. And even though in Korea the employment rate may seem high, that doesn't count for freelancers like me and Walter, and of course the self-employed people. So I think right now we're seeing more phenomenon where less millennials and Gen Zs choose to work full-time jobs, and they just choose like multiple jobs where they can just gain more money doing different jobs. And I mean, this may benefit them in the short run, but as a whole nation, moving forward, it's not the best option.
We'll have to see what happens. Now, what about you, Walter? What were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, to add on to Ki-hoon's last statement, as a freelancer, I'm always looking out for work, and I always want to, progress in this field, especially here in like the English broadcasting field.
Yeah.
But the current situation in the English broadcasting field is not actually very good at the moment. And so if I had to leave this industry and go pursue other full-time work, I'm actually not very confident because of the situation that our domestic job market is in. And that means, like, do I need to go looking for other places? Do I have to go back to Australia to look for other jobs? But my family's settled here. It's a very worrying thing for the future.
And I think what's worth noting is that the reason why I chose this econ news as part of our news feed is because back when I was in high school, I didn't really know what like news in the United States would affect me in one way or like news in China. But now I realize that once I'm in the job market, it does affect me.
It does.
It's not something that's just happening in the opposite side of the world. And that was our news feed for this Friday. Let's head into our discussion topic of the day. Our life expectancy is getting longer thanks to advanced technology, but preparing and investing for the future seems to be getting harder, which in turn is causing a lot of anxiety among people from our generation. And is our generation doing anything about that? Let's find out. South Korea has the second longest life expectancy in the OECD. The Health Ministry announced in July that the average life expectancy in Korea was 83.6 years. That was 3.3 years longer than the OECD average. Experts attributed this to improved living conditions and enhanced medical care. But this isn't coming by as the best news to many young millennials and Gen Z. Grappling with life at the moment is already strenuous for young people, as buying their own apartment and getting a job seem to be the most urgent yet difficult tasks. That's why saving up and thinking about life after retirement seems to be a luxury to many. Thinking about life after retirement does seem to be a luxury for many people in our generation whose priority at the moment could be securing a stable job. But it's definitely something we need to think about with a longer life expectancy. And here in the studio, what do you guys think about this issue? Are you guys saving up for retirement? And when exactly do you want to retire?
Well, for me, this is probably my number one stress at the moment.
Number one stress?
Yes, I can't believe that I already, I've been actually thinking about retirement since I started working full-time way back when I was like 19 or 18 years old. So I've actually been starting to save up for retirement from then, but it's still something even like 15 years later that has me concerned, like, am I going to be able to save enough for, my retirement, and what am I going to do during that retirement? Here in Korea, I also have a fund in Australia, but I also have a fund here in Korea. One of them is a compulsory situation where people who are non-citizens have to invest into the government retirement pension.
Yeah.
But I also save up in my own personal account as well. So I have several outlets that I'm investing in, but still very worried about my situation because honestly, I don't know when I want to retire. I would like to work for as long as possible, but as we know in Korean society, our retirement age is 65, but it's very difficult to get jobs up until 65, to be honest with you.
But I guess like if you take a look on the positive note here is that you're a freelancer.
Yes.
So maybe you'll be able to work till you're like 85 or something.
Well, maybe not in this industry, but maybe somewhere else, yes.
You can make like a groundbreaking innovation there.
I could.
We'll see what happens. What about you, Ki-hoon?
I mean, I honestly hope that Arirang makes old generation.
That's a
So we
great
can work
idea.
till like 80 or 90.
We'll definitely be on
And
that
talk
one.
about the days back then, we used to do this and that. Anyway, like with me, it hasn't been too long since I started saving up, but I realized looking ahead and about my retirement as well, I realized that it's better to start saving up now rather than later, even though it's not a big amount. I did have a housing subscription deposit account for many years, but I had to break it due to personal financial issues.
Yeah.
But and of course, I didn't have any immediate plans of getting married, which I would benefit the most from. Instead, I did invest a little into stocks, not for immediate returns, but for like a long-term investment that I can actually maybe pull out like down when I retire, as like a personal pension fund. But honestly, retirement did seem like it's something that was very distant for me. But knowing that I'm not in a situation to receive help from my parents, rather I have to help them in return. I thought, I really need to support myself. So, like what Walter said, I would love to work as a freelancer past my retirement age, if only when I'm capable, and if I have the opportunity. But we'll have to wait and see. But I think health is wealth.
Health is
I'd
wealth.
like to end in that note, positive note.
I think that's like your go-to line
it
on
is.
news.
It has to be. I don't want to cry.
And hopefully, as you mentioned, Kyun, there'd be like a chance for old generation to be
Hopefully,
airing here on Arirang, so we don't need to worry too much about life after retirement.
I'm already closest to that old age, so.
He's getting there. And I'm next.
But
Next in line.
speaking of like thinking of life after retirement, a lot of people from our generation do seem to be quite anxious and worried, especially throughout the whole process itself. It's so so hard to save up, not even just for retirement, but even for like a whole month.
Right.
So, Walter, could you tell us like how people, especially from our generation, are worried about becoming old and living a second life after retirement?
Yeah, well, actually, I have a graph to show you in a few seconds, just what the people of Korea are worried about and what are the concerns. So if we take a look at the screen, I can just show you what the Koreans are feeling, the MZers specifically. Now, a poll done by Kium Asset Management asked the question, what do young Koreans think about preparing for retirement? Now, 48.5% are very nervous, 32.1% are very overwhelmed, 12.2% don't exactly know, which is a bit strange, but 7.2% is even stranger because they're excited about it. Now, if we put the number of people who are overwhelmed and nervous together, because I believe that they may go in hand, that's more than 80% of that population. They're actually really worried about retirement. And that's not a good thing in my opinion, because it either feels like we're either underprepared or that we don't have enough money to eventually retire comfortably.
Right, and you mentioned the 12%, and a very small amount of people are very excited.
I'd like to meet those 7.2% people.
I mean, what do they do for a living to be excited? I know, but for the 12%, I could relate because not a lot of people are able to think in the long run. You know, they're busy living day after day, which is why words like YOLO, you only live once, are coming about. Now, what about you, Yoon? Would you like to add on to how much you think people from our generation are anxious about life after retirement?
You know, I remember doing an episode talking about the deficit of the national pension. And experts are saying that it will be depleted by the end of year 2055. And that's only what?
32 years.
Exactly, yeah, 32 years from now. And we'll only be what? 60, 50, 60?
So young.
So that's still young, right?
Yeah.
And obviously that's not a positive outlook for our generation because we have to pay, you know, upfront for the older generation, with the fear that we might not be able to even receive any of our national pension that we paid for. So I think the younger generation has looked for different options of investing, because back then, you know, from our parents' generation, just investing, saving in banks was just enough for them to actually make a living, even after retirement. But nowadays, that's not become very possible. So. Well, for me, you know, I've invested in stocks, but I've seen many people invest in like EFTs, NFTs as well, and of course even cryptocurrency, which was quite volatile. But anyway, that's what they wanted to do because they wanted like immediate cash in return because they had like a bleak future. And I think this really just shows that how unstable the economy is right now. That's why, you know, a lot of people are looking for different options, but I don't know. I will hopefully find a better way to, you know.
You mentioned a really good point there. The more people from our generation that are investing in different options just reflects how they're worried about what they're going to be living off of in the future. And we're going to be finding out what people abroad think about this issue now. And we've asked our viewers to chip in their thoughts and experiences. So here's what 3 of them had to share with us. Take a look at the screen to find out what they said. SGR said, I think everything in life should be a balance. Don't save nothing for retirement, but also don't walk away all your money so you can't enjoy your youth. James said, among my group of friends, several of their parents lived into their 90s, but due to inflation, they outlived their ability to meet their financial needs. I suggest plan for this scenario, but hope you're never faced with it. Tiras Bell said, I'm saving for retirement. I have a 401k as well as both a IRA account, and I hope to retire early. I also feel that the retirement age should be lowered a few years, as most people in the U.S. have to work until they're 65. Now, Tiras Bell mentioned a really interesting point here. In Korea, the public's opinion is that the retirement age should be elevated. But it's quite interesting to see that there are diverse opinions to this matter. Now, would you guys like to add anything on as to how people abroad have been preparing for life after retirement?
Some countries in Europe, like Germany, Sweden, and Norway, they're asked to pay 40 to 50% of their income as tax from the government. This is only to ensure that all retired citizens will receive a similar income even after they retire, so they'll have enough spending money for the rest of their lives, you know, after they stop working. Also in Japan, where they're leading the aging population before Korea, they're putting more efforts into the welfare for the senior citizens because obviously, just like us, they're very anxious about whether they'll have enough money to spend after they retire.
Right. Now, Walter, would you like to add anything on?
Well, I can only speak on behalf of my friends friends who live abroad and have a very safe job, security, but they all have different retirement plans, and that actually affects the way that they save. For some people, they want to have that like nice little house by the beach and just go to the beach every day. Others, they want to travel.
Right.
So it just really depends on their retirement plan, and that's how much they invest in. So I think that's quite interesting. Like, not everyone is trying to go for the most amount of money, just what is going to suit them for their retirement.
Just so they are able to survive.
Yeah.
All right, and let's find out whether all of the ways our viewers suggested and the methods and the ways that we're looking into life after retirement that you guys mentioned in the studio are actually okay in terms of better preparing ourselves for our old age and whether that's going in the right direction. We'll do this by adding an expert in our talks right after this. We're going to speak to an associate professor of finance now. It's Professor Derek Tharp from the University of Southern Maine. Welcome, Professor Tharp.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right, Professor, could you first explain to us whether millennials and Gen Z in the States seem to be as worried or even nonchalant about preparing for life after retirement, and why do you think this is the case?
Well, I think while retirement certainly may not be top of mind for a lot of millennials and Gen Zers, I don't really think there's anything uniquely nonchalant about their mentality toward retirement. In the past, I think that idea of getting a job with a pension and sticking with one employer until retirement may have been more common, but the reality is that for someone in their 20s, 30s, 40s, thinking about retirement is a really abstract concept. We'll change a lot before retirement. The world will change a lot. So to me, it's natural that retirement may be a bit of an afterthought for those individuals at this stage of life. But when we look at the actual savings behavior of millennials and Gen Zers in the United States, I don't think it reflects total disengagement. I do think one major difficulty in trying to compare how millennials and Gen Zers are doing is the changing composition of households in the US and their investment in education. So a lot of the gloomier statistics come from comparing a household income, say 50 years ago to today. But 50 years ago, a household in their mid-20s was more likely to be a two-person household that was done with their education. So it's not surprising to me that millennials and Gen Zers might lag statistically when they're getting a later start. But I don't think the evidence suggests that they aren't eventually earning and saving at rates that allow them to catch up and be successful in retirement.
Oh, that's very interesting, Professor. But any exemplary case studies we can use as, let's say, a blueprint, whether that's from an individual or a government policy?
Yeah, I think if we're going to look for any particular framework for helping people educate themselves and develop good financial behaviors, I think it would be good to take a look at what Dave Ramsey here in the United States has built. Many of my colleagues in academia may not be as fond of Dave Ramsey as I am. In fact, some may dislike what they see as the simplicity of his advice. But I've written a fair amount about what I perceive as really the underappreciated brilliance of his approach. And he's built arguably the largest financial literacy program in the world. And part of what makes it so powerful that it's not just focused on the education. He's developed this baby steps sort of framework, which is kind of 7 simple steps that anybody could follow to get out of debt, save for retirement, build up an emergency fund. But on top of that, that powerful framework, he's also developed entertaining content that keeps listeners coming back to reinforce what they're learning, kind of a peer-driven support system through Financial Peace University, which is a program that many people teach through churches, and also an extensive network of professionals that are ready to assist his followers. So overall, I think it's really something worth looking at.
Wow, that was very informative. Professor, what is one thing that we should always keep in mind when we try to better prepare for retirement?
I think one thing I would really emphasize is that our mentality does make a really big difference. So even though millennials and Gen Zers do face some unique challenges with our finances, at the end of the day, I think we need to take ownership and responsibility for our finances. And we should always be focused on what we can do personally to improve our situation. So if we don't like our job, we're not getting out of debt, we aren't saving for the future, there's perhaps nothing more dangerous than falling into that mindset that there's nothing we can do to improve. And additionally, I think it can be helpful to look to others who've been successful in achieving something we want to do, but it's also best to keep the focus on making incremental improvements in our own life, because there's a tremendous amount of psychological research that tells us we struggle to ever feel satisfied with our financial situation. As our income goes up, our perception of what high income is also goes up. And being appreciative of that incremental progress we do make in our own life is more useful than always trying to compare ourselves to someone else. And particularly in today's world of social media, where it's so easy to craft a false perception of how someone's doing financially, I think it's much more important, or it's as important as ever, to not get caught up in that keeping up with the Joneses dynamic and trying to chase some sort of false perception.
That is so true, and that's very simple, you know, having ownership and responsibility whilst not comparing yourself to false perceptions out there. So simple, but quite difficult at the same time, so we'll work on that. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and before I let you guys go, what's the main takeaway from today's discussion? How will you better prepare for retirement, Ki-hoon?
You know, before, earning more was my main goal, but
Yeah.
now I think saving up more, like wisely, has become my new mindset. You know, I do understand why a lot of millennials and Gen Zers use the word YOLO because of the current situation. But all in all, I think having the correct balance sheet, knowing where your money is being spent, being saved up, and really being smart about how you treat money is, I think, really important.
All right, what about you, Walter?
For me, I guess it's a hard question to ensure that I have a comfortable retirement. I want a simple one, just somewhere in the mountains, in the woods, where there's no one else around and no one to talk to. But for now, it's just
Without your family?
a little strange.
Is that what you really want?
With my family, but
Okay,
they
with your
probably won't
family.
want it.
Okay.
That's
but
different.
for now, I'll just continue this path of saving, like Ki-hoon said. Like, it's the only way I can do it, rather than, and maybe get a bit more, much more of a handle on my spending as well. I think.
And I think Professor Tharp's last comments really relieved me in a sense, because the more you're earning, the more you have false perceptions. You can easily fall into that perception of, I need more. But then at the end of the day, trying to keep a realistic outlook on how much you're actually saving up is really important, because you should be owning how much you earn and how much you can use in the future. And that's all we have for you today. We'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Walter Lee
Lovely to be here.
and Park Ki-hoon.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next week. We are
News Generation.